compliance, the practice of obeying rules or requests made by people in authority.
This is the Pharmacy Compliance Guide with Jeff Hedges.
Good morning. This is Carlos Aquino from PharmaDiversion, LLC, and you're listening to the Pharmacy Compliance Guide.
Pharmacy Podcast Network listeners, first of all, this is the host and founder of the Pharmacy Podcast Network, Todd Urey. If this is the first time listening to a podcast, I welcome you. I thank you for taking the time to listen to this. This network has grown over the years. We launched in 2009. We found some of the greatest minds in the pharmacy industry to participate. One of those is the Pharmacy Compliance Guide podcast, which is a special partnership between Jeff Hedges with Hedges and Associates, who really focuses on some of the most tedious, most detailed information of what it is to run your community independently owned pharmacy and how important that is. Today is very exciting for the network because we're bringing to the table, we're bringing to the podcast an expert within the world of DEA documentation and how important that is to understanding this. It's been big in the news lately, and it's something that's important that we should be talking about. So without further ado, welcome to the Pharmacy Compliance Guide episode with Jeff Hedges. And good morning, Jeff. I know you have a special guest. I can't wait to introduce him. How are you doing?
We're doing very good today. So, and we, with Carlos here with us today, we bring a very, very important subject. Last year, in 2017, we saw DEA changing their focus on pharmacy compliance. DEA started increasing their enforcement from the verification of the Combat Methamphetamine Certificate to a more formal on-site inspection. Now, with the emphasis on the opioid epidemic, DEA is under increased pressure to look at the abusers of the system. And naturally, the first place any inspector is going to look is at the pharmacy. At this point, we are spending a lot of time with our clients, and we're looking at updating our clients and talking to them about this trend. And we're providing them more and more information. And I attended a conference last September, and Carlos was there. And one of the presentations was maintaining your pharmacy and DEA compliance. The CE wasn't well attended. However, it was one of the most interesting and most informative CEs I've ever attended. One of the two presenters is joining Todd and me today, and this is Carlos Aquino. He is the president of PharmaDiversion. He's based out of Philadelphia. Carlos is a retired DEA diversion investigator, as a great supporter of independent pharmacists. If you ever have an issue with DEA, Carlos is the first person you should call. And his information is listed on the podcast, and you'll be able to contact him. But DEA is a very serious thing that we're all dealing with right now, and we'll be talking about it as we go through this today. So with this, hello, Carlos.
Jeff, good morning, and thank you for the invitation, for allowing me to be your DEA consultant. And it's a great honor for me to be doing this with you.
Well, as we go through today, some of you may have seen a bulletin we sent out last month about DEA documentation. And there are three main points that we want to talk about today. And first one is the CSOC usernames and passwords. The second item is a power of attorney for DEA forms 222 and electronic ordering, and then receiving the C2 orders from the wholesaler and completing the DEA proper documentation. These three elements are where the pharmacies are getting in trouble with DEA. And when you think you're doing everything right, don't assume, as we're going through this today, don't assume that you're doing everything right. Don't say that you know you're doing everything right. We want you to go listen to the podcast today. Then I want you to go back and systematically look at what we've talked about and make sure you're doing everything, because the fines we're going to talk about are actually being levied, and they're extraordinarily important.
Well, that seems straightforward. Someone who doesn't understand compliancy issues, and it's the whole reason that we've really been excited, Jeff, for you to constantly and consistently be providing information to us. This makes sense at the right time to get this out to the network. Carlos, can you explain how and why the power of attorneys for DEA Forms 222 and electronic orders is used?
Sure, Todd. In the DEA regulations that can be found on the DEA Diversion website. So if you go to your laptop and just Google DEA Diversion, you'll see something that'll look like the DEA Office of Diversion Control. That's the website that you should be looking at. And in that website, there are DEA regulations and federal laws. In the specific DEA regulation under Title 21, the Code of Federal Regulation 1305.05, it clearly states that the registrant can provide power of attorney to any other individual, and doesn't necessarily have to be a pharmacist, to any other individual, the power to order Schedule II controlled substances. And this is the only, the power of attorney only applies to Schedule IIs. All right, there's misunderstanding sometimes with regards to Schedule 3, 4s, and 5s. But in the paper 222, there's a signature that has to be placed by the purchaser. In that case, it's the individual registrant or the person that is given the power of attorney. In the electronic, in CSOS system, you have an electronic signature, which is your password. As soon as you log into your CSOS, it automatically is capturing your password and your electronic signature whenever you're making that purchase.
With the opioid epidemic and what it's done to our country and how much attention there's on this could not come at a better time. And really the final point you're looking at is the receiving of the Schedule II drugs. And from what we've talked about, this seems to be where the DEA is focusing on their inspections.
Yes, everything is about documentation. When the drug order is received, CSOS is accessed by the authorized individual with a power of attorney for DEA Form 222 and electronic orders with the individual username and password that is not shared with another person. The order for the controlled substances, C2s, is checked against the packing slip and invoice. The DEA 222 is completed through CSOS, and then the 222 is printed out. Again, you have to print out the document at that moment in time. And most systems will state that the document will actually, on what you're printing out, this is not a DEA issued Form 222. This form is available for convenience. Okay. The DEA will still accept this. However, if you have and the reason why we want you to print this, if this document is not printed, and some systems, depending on the wholesaler, depending on the browser, when you print it out, it may print out blank. And if it prints out blank and you're sitting there with DEA, that's a $14,000 fine. So we want you to print it out at that moment. And if it does print out, okay, blank, you just complete at that moment. If it does print out completed, you still want to print it out and put that in with the packing slip and place it on the in a hard copy file, and you keep it for 2 years.
Pay attention to your lockup blockers, pharmacy owners. Pay attention, because a internet browser like Chrome, like Internet Explorer, any of them out there, they may be blocking a pop-up that has very vital information. So be cognizant of that.
And Jeff, you're absolutely right. And many pharmacists and registrants don't completely understand the CSOS requirements. And I normally advise the pharmacist to print that copy out and staple it to their invoice and keep that as the document that they will be presenting to DEA. And in most cases, I would say 99% of the time, DEA will accept it because it's readable. It looks like a DEA Form 222, even though the supplier may note on it that it's not a DEA Form 222, because what that form will require to have on there is your quantities that you receive and the date that you receive. And I will always tell you to put the signature of the individual verifying those quantities. Now, any Schedule 2s should be looked by the pharmacist and not by the technician. And to note those specific requirements on that form. And then you keep those forms and file them on a monthly basis. I also want to remind registrants, and when I say registrant, the registrant is the person who does the initial application for the retail pharmacy or does the renewal every year. So if you are the owner of the pharmacy and you allow your pharmacist in charge to do that for you electronically and put their name in there, they become the registrant, not the owner. So I always recommend to the owners of pharmacies that they do the initial application and then they also do their renewals with their names on there. But there's, on the paper 222s, you can look at Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulation 1305, Section 13 through 19. And for the electronic, I'd be looking at 1305, Sections 21 through 28. One of the things that in the DEA regulations where I have pharmacists all the time asking me, show me exactly where I have to present a 222 or an electronic order form that's linked to my original order. And if you look at Title 21 Code of Federal Regulation 1311.60, it very clearly states that you have to provide something that is readable to the inspectors, to the DEA diversion investigators, when they are there to do an inspection of your controlled substances. Jeff, one of the misunderstandings out in the world of the retail pharmacy is the requirements of an individual to do an application in order to become a purchaser of a Schedule 2 for the pharmacy. There's one application that initially has to be done, and also there has to be a power attorney record also created by the pharmacy. And both of those two pieces, along with a copy of two IDs, of which one has to have a picture ID, is generally sent to the DEA CSOS unit but in many cases, I would say make copies also and provide them to the supplier whose CSAW system you are using, because they too will require you to have they're required to maintain a copy of that information as part of their due diligence responsibilities as a supplier.
Jeff, tell me about the whole CSAUS username and password thing.
Yes, there is a common misconception since everyone has gone to the online CSOX ordering process. First, every person who uses the CSOX system must have their own username and password. No person may share another person's username. And I repeat, no person may share another person's username. Having a single username for one pharmacy only works if you never take a day off, ever, and we know that won't happen because the store is open. And if you're there, you are opening yourself to scrutiny with DEA as soon as they come in and start asking questions. Setting up additional users' names is not hard. You work with your wholesalers' software system to establish each additional username. Each system has their own variations and parameters. So if you have questions, just contact your wholesaler CSOC department and work through their processes as you set up the additional usernames. If they tell you to contact DEA to set this up, please don't do that. Just ask to go to their supervisor.
Carlos, I've been working with many different organizations that have been focused on the opioid crisis, and that includes medication-assisted treatment providers, health systems, PBMs, pharmacies, in each of the communities that I travel to. And what I was excited about when I heard about you coming on the show is your deep background in the layering of all of your experience, from being a police sergeant for over 20 years, being involved with the DEA for over 10 years, and now your focus, your ultra laser focus on the issues of compliancy with regards to DEA and the enforcement of that and what comes of that. So, Jeff was talking about this at the beginning. DEA is enforcing the documentation requirements, obviously, more now than ever, especially with this epidemic that we're going through. Can you give us a specific example of pharmacy who have recently received DEA fines or you're aware of with regards to those fines?
Yes, I have three specific examples that I can provide you. The first was a retail independent pharmacy in Manhattan, in New York, where the pharmacy reported the theft of 14 bottles of oxycodone 30 milligrams. And DEA came to the pharmacy to do their investigation on the theft. And one of the first things that they asked was, are the Schedule 2s ordered with paper 222s, or are they using the seesaw system? The three pharmacists were there at that moment, the three staff pharmacists. And all three of them mentioned that they were ordering through seesaws. And then the question came up is, did they have their individual login and passwords? And they said, no, we are using the registrant's password. So then what DEA did was the focus of the theft disappeared. Now the potential civil action began with that, no, we don't have an individual password. And the outcome of that is that DEA will fine you for each line on the CSAUS order for each one of those lines, you'll be fined $14,739. And for each order, they will fine you with $14,739. And what happened there was DEA asked for the power of attorney forms that were submitted to CSOS for each individual, which they didn't have. And for that also, they were cited for having failure to provide such records during an inspection. The fine in that particular case was $186 million.
Oh my Lord!
And the actual payment was $200,000, but the pharmacist decided to bring in some high-priced attorney to represent them, and it cost them an additional $200,000. So that bad experience cost them a total of $400,000. And what DEA and the U.S. Attorney's Office required a quarterly inspection, compliance inspection, to be done in the pharmacy every quarter, and an audit of all Schedule II controlled substances.
Carlos, between the three of us, we've all been in thousands of pharmacies, institutional pharmacies, specialty pharmacies, community pharmacies, and running sometimes like a chicken with the head cut off. I mean, we understand what you guys are going through. We understand logging into systems, but everyone needs to understand the volatility and the focus of DEA and the pressure on the DEA because of this opioid epidemic. And we have to be almost empathetic to the systems in place that have been designed from the DEA's perspective to protect the public. So username and passwords, guys and gals out there in pharmacy land, are not a joke. Let me repeat that. Your username and password must be your specific username and password. Do not mess around with this. Carlos, what's that second example that you were talking to Jeff and I before we started the show?
The second example that I had was on a pharmacy in Albany, New York, who decided to post on the side of the cash register the CSOS password. And when DEA was there to investigate a theft of controlled substances by an employee, the diversion investigator happened to see the little sign that says, "This is the CSOS password, the login and password."
Oh my.
And I mean, when I heard that, I was like, I can't believe that individual did that. And the fine was initially paid for a total of $400,000. Because again, each line that is on a CSOS order form, which on the paper is only 10, but on CSOS there's full numbers. Each line was a violation.
Wow. So think about this. If you're listening right now, you're in the car. Obviously, don't be writing stuff down. Just wait till you get back. Look at the episode. There's going to be show notes. There's going to be some guidance down there. You're obviously going to be able to reach out to the RJ Hedges team, as well as the information that we're going to get all of our listeners today about Carlos and his expertise. But think about this. Look at your workstation. Do you have sticky notes all over the place? Please, if there's any passwords on those sticky notes, I know it's not convenient. Take them down. Throw them away. If any of you have smartphones, and give me a break, we all know you do. So your iPhone, your Droid, whatever, there are applications that you can go to in Google Play, or you can go in the iTunes store, that are password protection. And by the way, they're password protection by your thumbprint that will store all of your personal and your business and professional passwords. So invest in something like that. And by the way, the investment is FREE, free. Some of those applications are free, and they're all governed by your thumbprint and protecting your password list. Do not put your password on a sticky note and put it on your computer. That's just silliness. Carlos, talk to us about receiving C2 orders from the wholesaler. This one is almost like the aha moment of this entire episode. So let's talk about that.
Let's talk about Schedule 2s. What happens in many pharmacies is that responsibility to verify the quantities are given to the pharmacy technician, who will then review the quantities that they're receiving, and it's noted on the invoice, and then the invoice is turned over to the pharmacist or the person who was the purchaser, whoever did the order. And then that individual will go in and log into the CSAUS through using their CSAUS password and confirming those quantities. Now, one of my biggest problems with that is that you're giving that responsibility to an individual who may decide to steal that product and only give you quantities that were different from the quantities that were noted on the invoice. And many a times that information is not picked up until later when the theft continues and there's a reporting to DEA. So my recommendation is, if you're the pharmacist, it's your purchase if you purchased the controlled substance, the C2, the Schedule 2s, you should verify that yourself to make sure that that order was complete, and then confirming on the CSAUS system.
Carlos, thanks so much for the examples. This is important stuff. There's so much more that probably is swirling in the minds of our pharmacy owners right now. So in closing, Jeff, what kind of framework of next steps can you give our listeners about this subject, this incredibly important subject that's causing a lot of pain for pharmacy owners out there, not only from fines perspective, but making sure that they have the right policies and procedures in place?
There's basically 3 points when everybody, when you get back to the pharmacy or you sit down in your pharmacy, that you need to look at. And when I talk to the pharmacies, and it's about 95% of the folks that I talk to, that they're not in compliance. So just look at these 3 points. Okay, first off, make sure that you have a signed power of attorney for DEA Forms 222 and electronic orders. If you don't know what that form is, or you don't have it, if you're our clients, just go to the compliance portal into the DEA compliance program, and it's right there. If you're not our client, you can be. But if you just go into the DEA Pharmacist Manual and just go right in there and it's type in power of attorney in the search engine, and it'll take you right down to it. And it'll give you an example on how to do it. Like, who needs that power of attorney? It's anybody who has a username and password, and anybody who's orders a Schedule 2 or receives a Schedule 2. So that's the first thing you need to check. The second thing you need to check is to make sure that you have proper usernames and passwords. We've talked about that several times already. Okay. Don't have one username and password. Okay. Make sure you have multiple ones. If your wholesaler doesn't want to give you them, talk to their person who's saying no, talk to their supervisor. If you only have one username and password, you better be at the pharmacy every day, and you better be checking in, ordering them every day, and you better be there every time an order comes in. Because all these DEA inspector has to do is ask your staff a couple questions and you got fines, because you're never going to be there every day, because you're going to have vacations, you're going to be sick, you're going to go to conferences. And finally, look at your receiving procedures. Do you have, the requirement is, do you have your DEA 222s readily available? That means you have to have them. When asked, you can pull them out and give it to the DEA inspector with the packing slip. That doesn't mean that they're in a file in a box somewhere else, or they're in the computer and they print out. You have to be ready to give to them, and they have to be completed. You do all those 3 steps and you're golden. There's nothing to worry about. But you got to make sure today that you're doing that, because it's not a question of if DEA is walking into your pharmacy. It's a question of when they're coming in, because of the President's declaration of this national emergency. DEA is the only regulatory agency that can come in to do a regulatory area, and the pharmacy is the only place they can regulate. The doctors are excluded. They're the ones writing the scripts. They're not, and the drug dealers are working on them. But you're the only one with the drugs on the shelf, and you're filling the prescriptions. So they're only going to be coming at the pharmacies, and they are coming at the pharmacies. So you've got to make sure that you are compliant. There is no room for error. As long as you do those 3 simple steps, and we'll have the bulletin that we posted earlier on a briefing notes here, and just do these 3 simple steps, and you're fine. If you get in trouble with DEA, Carlos's information is also on the briefing notes, and give him a call. Okay. If you get in trouble with DEA, I can't help you. Carlos can.
Carlos is the man. Hey, listen, pharmacy owners, pharmacy technicians, pharmacists, staff pharmacists, if you're listening to this show right now, I want you to go to your staff, to your director, to your operations manager, even to the owner. Bring this to their attention. Pharmacy owners, gather your staff. Talk about this. It's going to take you 10 minutes to review it. You could even use some of the documentation that's in our show notes. Reach out to RJ Hedges and Associates so that they can help guide you and your staff to educate everyone. It will be worth every minute of that 10-minute meeting to review this. It's so important that everybody is cognizant of some of the things that we just don't pay attention to. Pop-up blockers not working. Writing your password down on a piece of paper and putting it on a sticky note. It being out visible for everybody to see. I understand how busy you are. I know the pace that you're running to keep up with all of the challenges to run an independently community retail pharmacy, but it's not worth it to have this bring down your business and all the fines and all of the pain that goes along with this. Carlos, I want to thank you for being part of the Pharmacy Podcast Network's education through the Pharmacy Compliance Guide. It was an absolute pleasure. We got to have you back on the show. It was so interesting in talking with you. Jeff, thank you so much for being a consistent provider of information through the Pharmacy Compliance Guide.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, thanks to you, Todd, and thanks again to Carlos for everything you're doing. Keep up the good work.
You were listening to the Pharmacy Compliance Guide. We were talking with Carlos Aquino, who is the compliance consultant and founder of PharmaDiversion, LLC. His contact information will be in the show notes. And we thank you for listening to the Pharmacy Podcast Network.